a young EMT answered a call to his home that had fatal consequences.
Matthew Neulander, he heard on his radio that a woman was injured at 204 Highgate. There's only one woman at 204 Highgate, that's his mother.
She was unconscious and not breathing.
Matthew instantly knew that his mother was dead.
How did my mom get beaten to death in the living room of her house?
Who would ever kill Carol Neulander? They all loved Carol Neulander.
The answer would leave Matthew questioning everything and everyone he knew.
This is such a convoluted, perplexing, disturbing, troubling case, and I wish to God that this had never happened.
Today we're jumping across the country to the Garden State, New Jersey. Specifically, we're in the suburb of Cherry Hill for the tragic story of a mother of 3 who was found beaten to death in her home. This is a case of whodunit that shocked a community. We'll explore it from the beginning until the very end, when a panel of 12 jurors had to make the most difficult decision of their lives. I'm Sloane Glass, and this is Who Killed Carol on American Homicide. And just a note that some of this content is graphic. Please take care while listening. Consider the town of Cherry Hill, New Jersey. It's the perfect spot for people who want to live close enough, yet far enough away from 2 major cities.
Philadelphia to the south, New York City to the north.
Arthur Magida authored a book about one of Cherry Hill's most revered and respected couples, Fred and Carol Neulander. The 2 moved there in the 1960s when Fred took a job as a junior rabbi.
He was young, he was up to date. Lots and lots of people were happy that Fred and Carol had arrived.
Only about 2% of Americans practice Judaism, but with a community of over 25,000, Cherry Hill has one of the largest Jewish populations in the country, making it the perfect place for Rabbi Neulander to start his own synagogue.
In 1974, Fred and 17, 18 members of the earlier congregation formed Makor Shalom. Fred chose that term, Makor Shalom, because it means source of peace.
And that peaceful synagogue grew to nearly 1,000 congregants in Cherry Hill. And Rabbi Fred and Carol Neulander were looked at like royalty.
They were committed to this congregation. They were committed to developing something new that had not existed in Cherry Hill before. And that's what so many people found attractive about Makor Shalom and about Fred and Carol.
While Rabbi Neulander worked day and night, tending to his congregation, his wife Carol raised their 3 children.
They were almost like a unit separate and apart from their father, because they knew that many evenings their father might, if they were lucky, be home for dinner.
And Carol wasn't your typical rabbi's wife. She also ran a popular bakery called Classic Cakes.
This was amazingly successful. It was perhaps the finest bakery in South Jersey. Members of the congregation came there, of course.
Everyone came for their red velvet cupcakes, breakfast pastries, and assortment of elaborate cakes.
It was also very, very profitable. But she was very, very careless with some of the money that was coming into the bakery. She would just stuff it into her purse and come home at night with $5,000, $10,000, $15,000 in cash.
All that cash played into Carol's demise.
On November 1st, 1994, Fred put in his usual work day at Makor Shalom.
And on that afternoon, Carol had volunteered with pediatric AIDS patients and returned home while her husband was still at the synagogue.
About 9 o'clock, he went back home. He opened the door, glanced into the living room. On his right, saw Carol Neulander lying on the floor of the living room in a pool of blood.
Just imagine the scene. Fred found Carol face down and badly beaten. It was horrific. This was his wife. Her blood was everywhere, so he ran to the kitchen, grabbed his cordless landline phone, and called 911.
911, safety emergency.
I just came home. My wife is on the floor, and there's blood all over her. I don't know what to do.
Does she appear to be breathing?
No, there's blood all over.
They asked if she was alive. He said he didn't know.
I don't want to say touch her. Should I not touch her?
Just leave everything the way it is, sir, and stay on the phone with me until the first police officer gets her.
That's when the rabbi remembered his son, Matthew, was working as an EMT that evening.
He's going to hear this. Cool. He's an East Side EMT.
So I have to send somebody down, sir.
Oh, God.
Calm down. Hold on a second.
Tragically, Matthew Neulander did hear that call and quickly drove his ambulance to his house, nearly colliding with another emergency vehicle when he arrived. But before he got inside to see his mother, a friend grabbed him and carried him away from the house.
Matthew instantly knew that his mother was dead. Because if she was not, somebody would have said something comforting to him. Don't worry, she's barely injured. Don't worry, she's being treated right now. Nobody said anything like that.
That's when his dad, Rabbi Fred Neulander, walked up to him.
He was still holding his cordless telephone. Wasn't using it, wasn't talking to anybody, but his manner was completely composed.
The rabbi was still dressed in his tailored suit he wore to temple. He was in shock. He stood on the driveway of their two-story home listening as Matthew frantically asked him question after question about his mother. Each time, the rabbi offered the same answer.
Don't worry. Everything will be fine. He was always buttoned up, and he was buttoned up November 1st, 1994, when he saw Carol lying in the living room, when he called 911, when he did his version of trying to comfort his son, Matthew.
By then, all of Highgate Lane and Cherry Hill was a dizzying sea of red and white from the lights of the emergency vehicles parked in front of the Neulanders.
My name is Richard Bombera. November 1st, 1994, I was working as a patrolman for the Cherry Hill Police Department.
Officer Bumbear was one of the first responders that night.
It's a upper middle class community, beautiful homes. It's the type of community where, everyone had their lawn nice, everyone knew each other, neighbors were very close and very friendly. So when I walked up the driveway of the residence, I noticed a man dressed in a suit, probably in his 50s or so.
That man was, of course, Rabbi Fred Neulander.
He had a portable phone in his hand, and immediately I asked him what was going on. He raised his left hand and pointed with the phone and said, "She's in there." And I was like, oh, okay. So I entered the house and immediately noticed Carol laying on the floor in the room right to my right. It was a white room. Didn't look like it was a room that was used or used commonly. White carpets, white furniture, white walls, and there was just this bright red blood spattered everywhere in that room. When I examined the body, I noticed that there were several indentations to her skull. Her fingers were all broken back and open from defensive wounds. There was a tremendous amount of pooled blood. She was cold. It was just obvious to me that somebody had bludgeoned her to death by repeated strikes to her head.
So now the complicated work of trying to figure out what happened began. There was no sign of forced entry and no other victims in the house. Just Carol.
Carol Neulander, she was business partners in a very prominent bakery, and she got into the habit of taking the till home where there was a significant amount of money, $10,000, $15,000.
The police wondered, if someone was after Carol's money, why did they leave other valuables behind? And how did they get into the house?
They had a lot of expensive items in the house. None of it was gone through. Dressers weren't gone through looking for money or jewelry. Everything was neat and tidy. So the idea of that it was a robbery or a home invasion that went bad didn't seem to line up with what I saw.
It wasn't like the police saw many homicides in Cherry Hill. This was the first homicide in 2 years, and it involved the beloved wife of Rabbi Fred Neulander.
The mayor's pulling up, and there's a lot of people showing up at that house that just seemed like, wow, this person certainly wasn't just an average citizen.
So the question on everyone's mind that night was why?
There weren't any suspects, there weren't any leads, so the community just thought it was a random act of violence.
So no one could believe Carol Neulander, successful small business owner, mother of 3, who just spent her day volunteering with pediatric AIDS patients, had been robbed and beaten to death.
Not only are we dealing with a homicide of a prominent family in Cherry Hill, but Carol's son, Matthew, was working as an EMT that night, and he was responding to the house.
Matthew was a young EMT who just wanted to be with his mother to say goodbye, but heartbreakingly, protocol didn't allow it.
And that was difficult. It was unfortunate. I would have wanted to say goodbye to my mom, in that situation. And it's difficult. It's a part of the job, unfortunately, and you have to deal with it.
His mother was dead, and the lives of the Neulander family would never be the same again.
They were an all-American family in a sense. They had everything, and now they have nothing. It's a shame.
People are sympathizing with Fred and whispering words of consolation in his ear.
Arthur Magida wrote a book about Carol Neulander's murder.
Carol's funeral was one of the largest in South Jersey. Dignitaries came. Politicians came.
As part of the Jewish tradition, people offered their condolences to the rabbi by saying, "May her memory be a blessing to you."
And then they whispered among each other who would ever kill Carol Neulander. They all loved Carol Neulander. And everybody is sad. And still, Fred Neulander is showing virtually no emotion.
There is a Jewish tradition called Shiva. It's the week-long period of mourning after a death. During Shiva, your friends, family, and neighbors come by and take care of you. They bring you food, provide you comfort, and run your errands so you can mourn.
How he comported himself that evening and in some of the days that followed very much flowed from his experience as a rabbi. Fred Neulander dealt with death and birth over and over again in the course of his profession. He was to some degree, acculturated to death. Not to murder, but to death.
By the time they were sitting Shiva for Carol Neulander, Cherry Hill police officers had already questioned Fred Neulander and 2 of his children, Rebecca and Matthew. If you remember, Matthew was one of the EMTs who came to the house on the night of his mother's murder.
Matthew told the police about a very, very severe argument that he witnessed between his parents 2 days before Carol was killed. Carol telling Matthew that Fred didn't want to work on this marriage any longer, that Fred wanted to divorce Carol, and Matthew told the police that Carol had then dashed down to the basement, grabbed some suitcases, and threw them at Fred Neulander. Told him to get out.
But Rabbi Neulander gave detectives a different take.
He said it was just hunky-dory, everything was fine. Yeah, they had their little bickerings occasionally. Whose turn is it to clean out the dishwasher? But theirs was a rock-solid marriage.
So there was something else the police began to focus on. The Neulander's daughter, Rebecca, lived out of town and talked with her mom every day. She told the police about 2 strange conversations she had with her mother. The first happened 2 weeks before Carol's murder.
Carol pulled up to her driveway after working late at Classic Cakes when a total stranger tapped on her window, rolled the window down, said that the rabbi had sent him over to deliver some mail, and he handed Carol an envelope. And then he asked if he could use the bathroom. Carol said, of course, and she let him into the house. He used the bathroom. He left. And shortly after that, Carol's daughter, Rebecca, called. She said, Mom, what are you doing tonight? Oh, I just got home. Somebody came to see Daddy. He isn't there. But he gave me mail that Daddy had been waiting for. And Carol told Rebecca, what's the strange thing is that I opened this envelope, it wasn't sealed, and there wasn't anything in it. Well, neither Carol nor Rebecca knew what to make of that.
It was pretty weird. And 2 weeks later, on the day of Carol's murder, they were on the phone again when the mysterious man returned.
Carol opens the door, and Rebecca wants to know who it is. And she says, oh, that's the bathroom man from last week. Rebecca says, well, what does he want? He says, oh, Dad told him to come over. And Carol looks out. She sees that the bathroom man is with somebody else. It's cold. She encourages both of them to come in, be warm. Rebecca's very concerned that her mother is inviting these two essential strangers into the house. Carol says there's nothing to worry about. The door is closed, and that was the last that anyone in Carol's family heard from her.
Detectives asked Rabbi Neulander if he knew who this mysterious visitor was.
He claimed to have no idea what the police were talking about. He had never sent anybody over to the house with a message for him. He had never told Carol that somebody would be coming either of those evenings.
Detectives came to believe the bathroom man and his accomplice knew the rabbi's schedule and had been casing the house in order to rob and murder Carol.
Fred very soon was telling people the Colombians did this to Carol. The Colombians who worked at Classic Cakes and knew that Carol came home with wads of cash. That never panned out. There were rumors that the Russian Jewish mafia was behind this. So there was theory after theory after theory.
Rabbi Neulander told detectives he was at Melchiorre when Carol was murdered. They interviewed a dozen or so people at the synagogue, and his alibi checked out.
Yes, he was at the temple, in fact, the moment that Carol was killed. And that's why when he came back home, the blood in the living room was still very, very fresh.
This put detectives back at square one. So the weeks dragged on without any updates about the investigation, until finally, just a couple days before the Christmas holiday, the police called a press conference. But the Neulanders were nowhere to be found. One reporter asked the prosecutor if Rabbi Neulander was considered a suspect. He paused for a moment and said, "We don't rule in, we don't rule out."
They didn't know what to make of that.
Well, Rabbi Neulander did. He was furious. He had an alibi and questioned why the police hadn't cleared him. So he hired a PI named Len Genoff with an impressive resume that included a stint with the FBI and CIA.
Genoff seemed like the right person to turn to.
Rabbi Neulander knew Len Genoff. He met him a couple years earlier and helped him turn his life around.
Leonard Genoff was a difficult person to define.
Back in the 1980s, Len Genoff accidentally struck and killed someone who was pushing their stalled vehicle on the highway. Although Genoff was never charged, he fell into a deep depression and turned to booze. Years later, he was introduced to Rabbi Neulander, who offered to help him get back on his feet.
Len Genoff left Fred Neulander's office that day, fully committed to doing almost anything that Fred wanted him to do, because he saw the rabbi as his savior, as the next best thing to his Messiah.
So now you had the police and a very motivated Len Genoff working to find Carol Neulander's killer. Those investigations would uncover secrets that would shake Cherry Hill to its soul.
For years, there were rumors that Fred was a little bit too much of a ladies' man.
Arthur Megiddo wrote a book about the Neulanders.
He made a habit of going from woman to woman to woman and touching her and giving them compliments. And they always just happened to be the prettiest women in the congregation that evening.
So it turned out the leader of the community was not so pious. And back in 1992, one particular woman caught Rabbi Fred Neulander's eye.
Don't let the broadcaster see that I have all this makeup over here. It's filming it for convention. When is the convention? September? Oh, thanks a lot. Here, let me hide my mirror.
Elaine Sonsini was a prominent radio personality in Philadelphia. And so was her husband, Ken Garland. Elaine met Rabbi Neulander when her husband, Ken, was dying of leukemia.
And a day or two after that, Fred Neulander called Elaine Sonsini, asked how she was. She said, I'm fine, I'm coping. Fred asked if he could come over to her house. She agreed. They had lunch together. He asked if he could return soon. She said he could. And they engaged in what the police would soon call intimacy.
He moves in on a widow a couple days after her husband's death. And then, despite Rabbi Neulander's 18-hour workday and Elaine's early morning radio schedule, the two managed to carry on an affair for nearly 2 years.
They would meet at Elaine's house 2, 3, 4 times a week. Fred often told her that she satisfied him sexually in a way that Carol never did. He alluded to the possibility that he might get divorced from Carol for Elaine. But sometimes he would hedge on that because he wasn't certain how that would affect his career.
So with all this secrecy, how did detectives learn about Elaine? Well, they obtained a copy of Rabbi Neulander's phone records. And something in those phone records from the morning after Carol's murder stood out.
One of the first people Fred called was Elaine Sonsini. Why would he possibly do that?
Detectives questioned Elaine, and they shared some information she did not know about Fred Neulander.
She's not the only girlfriend that Fred had. And they named the others 1, 2, 3, and perhaps 4.
Elaine was shocked and pissed, and that's when the gloves came off.
She tells the police they've had a long-standing romance. When she returns home that night, she calls Fred and says, Fred, I told the police everything. You're on your own now.
News of Rabbi Neulander's affairs rocked Cherry Hill and Melchiorre. These were women he had been counseling.
How could Fred Neulander, the stalwart of the community, the founder of Melchiorre, this charismatic, well-educated, enlightened individual who had this wonderful family and terrific wife, be playing around on the side? Who could possibly have time to do that anyway? It seems that Fred Neulander did.
Fred admitted to behaviors he was not proud of and stepped away from Melchiorre. In his letter to his congregants, he added that he had nothing to do with his wife's death. It was the same message he gave Elaine Sonsini in the days after Carol's murder. Being an adulterer didn't make him a murderer.
Fred invited Elaine into his office at the temple and said he loves her, said he wanted to marry her when the time would be appropriate.
The police didn't confirm or deny Elaine as a suspect in Carol Neulander's murder. It was much like the situation with the rabbi.
After one's spouse is murdered, the surviving spouse always becomes the first suspect.
Attorney Jeff Zucker represented Rabbi Neulander. His client had a lot of explaining to do. Here's Jeff Zucker.
And once things started to come out about the affairs that he had and the fact that the affairs involved congregants that he was counseling, then I think the tide started to change.
And as you can imagine, the local press was having a field day with stories of the adulterous man of God.
We thought the media attention was so horribly profuse and horribly against him.
As reporters hounded the rabbi and Elaine Sonsini for comment, Elaine asked the Cherry Hill Police Department for protection. 2 officers were then dispatched to keep an eye on her.
The interesting thing about Elaine Sonsini is that she also had an involvement with one of the police officers in this case, Larry Leaf.
Okay, so get this. Larry Leaf was one of the officers assigned to watch her. And in another twist to this story, Elaine and Officer Leaf became romantically involved. And that created a serious conflict of interest, especially when he was caught rummaging through police files related to the case.
We believe that Larry Leaf gave her access to certain of the investigative files at the Cherry Hill Police Department. Elaine Sonsini, she incidentally ended up marrying Larry Leaf.
So Internal Affairs investigated Officer Leaf and later cleared him of any wrongdoing.
That was another strange twist in this whole case. This is one of the most bizarre cases I've been involved in my 45 years of legal experience.
With reporters constantly hounding her, Elaine Sonsini used her radio show to come clean about her affair with Rabbi Neulander. In the summer of 1995, she tearfully apologized on the air for what she called some errors in judgment.
Sunny now and 78 degrees. I apologize to you for these guys.
But lost in the juicy stories of love, lust, and adultery were the Neulander children.
I felt bad for the family. I did. I felt bad for the kids.
Their mother's murder was still unsolved. And the only thing they're hearing is story after story of their father's infidelity.
Every day something else would come out in the local papers because of the horrible negative publicity he was getting. We thought it was time for him to speak out to say, I had nothing to do with this. So we called in the local television stations, let him read a prepared statement.
I categorically deny that I murdered my wife or arranged in any way to have her killed.
It was brief, but we thought it would be good for the public to hear him speak and to have him deny the charges.
The town of Cherry Hill struggled with their beloved rabbi's meteoric fall from grace. First, they had to process news of his affairs. And now, there are rumbles about him also being a murderer.
A person who is having an affair may be morally at fault, but it's a huge jump from someone having an affair to become a murderer.
And it didn't help that the police remained mum about potential suspects and shared very little about their investigation.
They were looking into leads for years, and they came up with a bunch of dead ends.
At the same time, the rabbi's private investigator, Len Genoff, used his FBI and CIA background to do his own research.
He one time came into our office with a sketch of what he said was a composite drawing of who the person who killed Carol Neulander would be. And we told the rabbi, please have nothing more to do with Len Genoff. He's a wild card. He's running up all kinds of blind alleys and making no sense. If you're going to continue working with this guy, we can't represent you anymore. You can't do it.
That's because around that time, some bizarre news about Len Genoff surfaced.
Len got married and asked the rabbi to perform the ceremony at the rabbi's home.
And there are wedding pictures of them arm in arm holding each other.
That seems nice. But when the police looked closely at these pictures of the rabbi with Len on his wedding day, they noticed something shocking.
Like, oh my God. They took the pictures right where Carol was laying when she was murdered.
The ceremony was performed at the exact spot where they found Carol Neulander's body. It's bizarre, but that's where it was, which was also another very strange twist in this whole case.
If a picture is worth 1,000 words, well, that saying doesn't work here, because this one left the police speechless.
It was hard for me to believe that this really could have happened.
Absolutely no one could make sense of why Rabbi Neulander would officiate a wedding in the very spot where his wife was murdered.
When Fred Neulander became a person of interest, it was devastating to the community.
Richard Bumbear worked as a Cherry Hill police officer in the 90s.
People started questioning their religion. People started questioning everything about them, and it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible.
Len Genoff's wedding happened in 1997. about 3 years after Carol's murder. And if that wasn't disturbing enough, their reception inside the Neulanders' home featured a cake from Classic Cakes, the bakery Carol had founded.
Even if you had no involvement at all, none at all, not only are you going to probably sell the house and get out of it, but you're not going to marry somebody and take pictures right where your wife was laying when she was murdered. That's pretty tasteless.
Absolutely. It is tasteless. And suspicious. The rabbi was never named a suspect, but also never cleared. He had an alibi, but it was overshadowed by news of his multiple affairs. And then there was a controversial polygraph test.
Sometime after the murder, Fred's lawyer took him from Cherry Hill down to Virginia to have a lie detector test.
Arthur Megiddo wrote a book about the Neulander murder.
Fred was asked if he killed Carol. The needles on the machine were fine, nothing abnormal. Fred was asked if he had anything to do with Carol's murder. At that point, the needles went crazy and wavered back and forth.
The rabbi's lawyer said Fred was under a great deal of stress at the time and was on medication.
Polygraph experts have said that makes no difference. Either you're telling the truth or you're not telling the truth.
About a month after Len Genoff's wedding inside the Neulanders' home, prosecutors made a curious move. They impaneled an investigative grand jury to see if there was enough evidence to charge Rabbi Neulander. More than a dozen witnesses were called to testify, including his children, the rabbi's mistress, Elaine Sonsini, and Len Genoff. The rabbi was never called to testify. And while this was going on, he told reporters he had nothing to do with Carol's murder.
He invited a woman, I think from Philadelphia Magazine, into his home, and his first words to her were, "Yes, I'm Fred Neulander. I'm the man you love to hate."
The grand jury met for nearly a year before things for the self-described man you love to hate took a drastic turn. Early one morning, the police performed a traffic stop of Rabbi Neulander just a few blocks from his home. They ordered him out of his car, and then they handcuffed him and placed him under arrest. They charged him with orchestrating the murder of his wife.
Everybody was stunned. How could this possibly be?
The prosecutor claimed Rabbi Neulander wanted so desperately out of his marriage that he hired a hitman to kill his wife so that he could continue his affair with his mistress, Elaine Sonsini. The prosecutor did not identify who the hitman was.
When there's a murder, and there's a husband, and as the police would very quickly discover, this was a very unfaithful husband. It's the husband who automatically becomes a suspect until vindicated.
It's not as if the Jewish religion forbids divorce. There are plenty of divorced rabbis. Rabbi Neulander said that's why this theory did not make any sense. He again denied the charges, and his private detective, Len Genoff, defended him to reporters.
I still believe that my client has had absolutely nothing to do with the horrendous murder of his wife.
Len Genoff defended the rabbi throughout his investigation. And while the rabbi awaited his trial, Len sort of became the rabbi's spokesperson.
I think Len wanted to be a more important person than he was in life.
Frank Hartman was Len Genoff's attorney.
That was a very, very important thing in Leonard Genoff's life, the rabbi. Whenever I saw him, he always wanted to talk to me about the rabbi.
Len and the rabbi had a curious relationship. It was almost like father and son. And Len so desperately wanted the rabbi's approval and attention.
He wanted to please the rabbi. He was very perturbed about the fact that he had never been bar mitzvahed. The rabbi told him that that was not important. If it was really important to him, he'd have a private ceremony for him. And he encouraged the rabbi, and encouraged him, which is how I think he ultimately became so dependent upon the rabbi.
For the next 18 months, Len, the former FBI and CIA agent, continued his own investigation to help clear the rabbi. He even met with a local reporter to exchange notes and discuss the case.
And she managed to worm her way into his confidence, mostly because she was trying to get information about the rabbi.
In the spring of 2000, 6 years after the murder, Len Genoff called this reporter with a scoop. They later met at a Jersey diner and were joined by 2 investigators working the case. Everyone went into this meeting not knowing what to expect. But picture this: 4 people sitting in the back of a New Jersey diner, drinking coffee after coffee and chain-smoking cigarettes, waiting to hear a scoop on an unsolved murder investigation. And what happened in the end was the absolute last thing anyone expected. Len Genoff, the private investigator Rabbi Neulander hired to find his wife's killer, confessed to killing Carol Neulander. Len said he was paid $30,000 to kill Carol. And the person who hired him to do it? Rabbi Fred Neulander.
I think this murder weighed heavily on his conscience, and I think he wanted to unburden himself. Len did it for the rabbi. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Len was completely under the sway of the rabbi. It didn't shock me to find that he was willing to consider doing something as serious as murder. Len wanted to be important, and the rabbi's attention made him feel important. I think that whenever the rabbi made up his mind that he wanted someone to commit a murder for him, this was a person who was certainly among the nominees, because the rabbi could exercise influence over him in so many different ways.
The plan was for Len Genoff to kill Carol, but Len brought an accomplice.
Len brought a friend along with him, a young man who was, I think, mentally challenged.
Well, that young man was his roommate, Paul Michael Daniels, who suffered from drug addiction and schizophrenia.
The young man struck her with a piece of pipe and said to him, "You have to do this too. It's not just me." So that's when Len actually struck a blow to the lady. And then they realized that her purse was there and that she had considerable money in it because it was the day's proceeds from her bakery shop. So to make it look like it was a robbery, they took the money and left.
So how did they even get into the house? Well, it turns out Carol opened the front door. Len Genoff had showed up at the house with an envelope for her husband. Genoff was actually there to kill her, but he couldn't find her purse, and the plan was to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. So he pretended to use the bathroom, and then he left. 2 weeks later, he returned with his accomplice and claimed he killed Carol.
They had a very good case against the rabbi and that he was in a lot of trouble.
Even with Len Genoff's confession, Rabbi Neulander denied being involved with the murder.
The defense of the rabbi was that, oh no, he did this on his own, he's only trying to incriminate me. But nevertheless, he did it. And generally speaking, in the law, the person who hires someone for murder is more culpable than the actual murderer.
In the summer of 2000, Len Genoff and his roommate pled guilty to aggravated manslaughter, and they made a deal with prosecutors to testify against the rabbi in exchange for a lighter sentence.
This is the person who could really nail the case down and fill in the dots, as they say.
Len Genoff would be the prosecution's star witness against Rabbi Neulander. The former CIA and FBI agent was about to embark on his toughest assignment yet. After years of denying he had anything to do with his wife's murder, a grand jury indicted Rabbi Fred Neulander for conspiracy to commit murder. Those charges grew to capital murder following the confession of his former private eye, Len Genoff.
At the time, he was facing the death penalty.
Jeff Zucker was one of Rabbi Neulander's attorneys.
You can't have any more pressure than that put on you.
When the trial opened in late 2001, prosecutor James Lynch told the jury that the adulterous rabbi wanted Carol murdered so he could continue to be with his mistress.
This is a man overwhelmed by lust, greed, arrogance, and betrayal. And as a result of those qualities and those characteristics, he involved himself in the murder of his wife. He planned it, he plotted it, he paid money for it to be carried out.
The rabbi's defense denied that motion.
He could have gotten a divorce. It would be a huge jump from wanting to leave one's wife to becoming a murderer.
Jurors first heard about the rabbi's years of adultery. One congregant from Makor Shalom testified that she and the rabbi slept together for months. In fact, their affair overlapped with the rabbi's affair with Elaine Sonsini.
Elaine Sonsini, she was a radio personality who had an affair with Rabbi Neulander.
We started seeing each other, I would say, every 2 to 3 weeks in the beginning. And after that, we saw each other just about every day.
Elaine talked about her personal life on the radio, but that didn't compare to sharing those intimate details on the witness stand.
We had relations in his office. He told me that I was the most special woman that he had ever met.
The rabbi was certainly a smooth operator and manipulator. He shared a dream with Elaine about how violence was coming Carol's way.
There was one conversation where he said to me that he just wished that she were gone. Poof, gone. I wish her car would go into the river.
After months of being the other woman, Elaine decided in the summer of 1994 that she wanted more or no more.
I said, Fred, I don't want to see you after December. I want to start my new life, January 1st, 1995. And he would say, please, hang in. Trust me. We're going to be together by your birthday.
Elaine's birthday was in December, and Carol Neulander was murdered the month before.
And what I said was, whatever you decide is fine. I support you 150%.
Elaine and the rabbi slept together nearly every day, including the day Carol was murdered. That night, Elaine was asleep by 8 p.m. and learned of Carol's murder the following morning.
He called me at work, and he said that he was all right, that he was at the police station all night, and that Carol had been killed, and something about a burglary, and he just asked me if I was frightened. And I said, no. Why, frightened of what? And he said, are you frightened of anything? And I said, no.
It was a strange conversation. Still, Elaine and the rabbi slept together a few more times after Carol's death, until she asked him to stop contacting her. Instead, he sent her cards and letters. Some of those were used as evidence in the trial.
Elaine, what you and I discovered and have comes once in a lifetime. It is a gift. God permits so infrequently. I need you to know that I will not, because I cannot, love another. Of course, I will always love you. Of course, you will always love me. I will pay any price, wait any time to keep my promise.
The prosecution argued that promise was that the two would be together.
After Carol Neulander died, Fred said, I told you to trust me. When God closes a door, he opens a window. I was afraid that even though I chose to believe that Fred Neulander was not involved in the murder of his wife, that there was that possibility. I dishonored his wife in life, and I was not going to dishonor her in death.
The rabbi's defense team wasn't having any of that. They quickly fought back and tried to discredit her.
And would you describe yourself, Miss Sonsini, as the type of a woman who has low moral standards, or who had low moral standards at that time?
Looking back on it now, yes.
And didn't you have very real concerns that you yourself may have been considered a suspect because you were the other woman?
I was having a 2-year relationship with a married man, and his wife was murdered.
What, were you afraid that Fred Neulander was going to kill you?
I was afraid that Fred Neulander might kill me, as a matter of fact, because I didn't know what had occurred the night of the murder, and I didn't know where I was in this relationship. All I knew is somehow I'm involved too.
Then the defense went for it. They questioned how Elaine went from sleeping with the rabbi to marrying Cherry Hill police officer Larry Leaf.
Isn't it a fact, Mrs. Leaf, that your now husband, Larry Leaf, was seen going through the files of the Neulander investigation in the confines of the Cherry Hill Police Department?
All Larry told me was that he wanted to read my statement to see if I was involved, if he was getting involved with a bad woman.
After a full day's worth of testimony about the rabbi's adultery, the prosecution then moved on to the rabbi's plan to get rid of Carol. And it started with someone named Pepe Levin.
Pepe Levin was somebody that the rabbi used to play racquetball with.
According to the testimony you're about to hear, a few months before Carol's murder, the rabbi approached him.
He says, I wish I can get rid of my wife, have her killed on the ground when I go home someday. He says, do you know anybody good? I said, get the out of my head, you crazy. I said, you're nuts. I said, you're nuts, stay away from it. You got a lovely wife, stick with it.
But the defense said that Pepe couldn't be trusted. He had a shady past that included time in federal prison for arson, conspiracy, and tax fraud charges.
He was a very colorful, strange, wild witness.
But perhaps the strangest, wildest, and most polarizing witness was the hitman who ultimately carried out Carol's murder, Len Genoff. He was the prosecution's star witness.
Len Genoff was a private investigator, a person who claimed to have been in the CIA, but he absolutely had many problems.
Yeah, it turned out his biggest problem was his credibility. This is kind of mind-blowing. After years of talking about his past, the defense learned that Len Genoff had never served in the CIA or the FBI.
Len Genoff was a pathological liar.
So was he telling the truth when he confessed to killing Carol? The prosecution's star witness had a lot of explaining to do, and it would all happen on the witness stand.
It was the darkest day of my life, sir. But I took that man's promise of $30,000. That was from Fred J. Neulander. And I killed his wife for that promise of $30,000.
That was Len Genoff's testimony. He and his roommate, Paul Michael Daniels, claimed to have murdered Carol Neulander on the evening of November 1st, 1994.
I pulled out the lead pipe, sir, and I whacked her in the back of the head. She started to stumble. And I heard the word, why? Why?
Those details were painful to hear, especially for Carol's relatives, who you can hear crying in the background as Len Genoff described killing and then robbing Carol.
Rabbi Neulander was adamant in telling me, only take the cash, whatever cash is in there. It could be $5, it could be $5,000, and throw the pocketbook away.
Len Genoff says he did what he was told to do. He disposed of the handbag and murder weapon in a dumpster near the Cherry Hill Mall. 2 days later, he had the audacity to attend Carol's memorial. That's where he saw the rabbi.
And then he kind of pulled me in for a hug, patted me on the back, and he whispered, everything will be all right now. She's dead.
Not only did Len Genoff attend Carol's funeral, but he returned to Rabbi Neulander's house a couple days later for the Shiva, the Jewish period of mourning.
And he hands me this manila envelope stuffed with cash. And he said, here's another down payment, $7,000 in cash.
The prosecution portrayed the rabbi as an arrogant and selfish adulterer who hired Len Genoff to kill his wife. But the defense said Len Genoff cannot be trusted.
Len Genoff was a person that we described as a pathological liar.
Jeff Zucker was one of Rabbi Neulander's lawyers who untangled Len Genoff's long string of lies.
We had so many things that we brought up to show that he had lied and lied and lied.
It's true. Len admitted to lying about being in the FBI and CIA. In fact, most of his resume was one giant lie. Most damning, Len admitted to lying to the grand jury.
Yes, I was trying to protect Rabbi Neulander and myself.
The defense said the only reason Genoff was testifying against the rabbi was to get a lighter sentence. And that was a pretty good argument.
He made a deal for himself, obviously, so that was part of the reason he was testifying.
But Len Genoff said he didn't act alone. He paid his roommate, Paul Michael Daniels, to help carry out the murder.
Did Mr. Genoff tell you that the money you got paid for the job came from Rabbi Neulander?
Yes.
He pled guilty to actually committing the murder.
Paul Michael Daniels was just 20 years old at the time of Carol's murder, and like Genoff, his time on the witness stand wasn't smooth.
He couldn't remember a lot of what happened. He basically said he just went along, I think, with what Genoff told him to do, but he really had mental problems.
Paul Michael Daniels was bipolar and suffered from schizophrenia and paranoia.
Claims that Genoff got him to go to the house to kill Carol Neulander.
Now, if you were a juror listening to this crazy case, you probably wouldn't know who or what to believe at this point, which is why the decision to put Rabbi Neulander on the witness stand was so important.
Rabbi Neulander was a tremendous orator when he spoke in the synagogue. He was the type of person who could really keep your attention and draw you in.
Delivering a sermon, well, that's one thing. A holy man answering questions about his numerous affairs and an open marriage is another.
We made a decision that if there were needs that could not be supplied between the two of us, then we would go outside the marriage.
His character was certainly called in question because of his infidelity.
The prosecutor was right. I was selfish and arrogant, and I went beyond the bounds of marriage. And I betrayed Carol, I betrayed family, I betrayed community, I betrayed my synagogue, I betrayed my profession. But divorce was never an issue.
Now, as you got into the fall of 1994, in relation to Miss Sonsini, did she make, if you recall, further references to the fact that she wished the affair to end?
Yeah, she, repeated that at the end of the year, she would have to create a new life for herself.
Did you ever tell her to trust you that something would happen?
No.
Did you ever say anything about anything happening so that you could be together with her on her birthday?
No, I didn't.
Did you ever say something to Miss Sonsini as expressed in her testimony concerning your wishes regarding Carol, which was proof? Carol's gone.
No.
He also denied the conversation with his racquetball buddy, Pepe Levin, about wanting Carol dead.
Never occurred. I wouldn't tell Pepe if I, twisted my finger. He was not a confidant. He just knew who Carol was, and we had socialized, and that's all.
As for Len Genoff, the rabbi said he never even hired him to investigate Carol's murder. It was Len who offered his services.
Did you ever agree with Mr. Genoff that you wanted to have your wife killed and that you wanted him to do it for money?
No.
Did you ever want a divorce ever from your wife for Elaine Sonsini or any other woman?
No.
As you sit there today, sir, are you guilty or innocent?
I'm innocent.
Well, it wasn't surprising the rabbi held his own while answering questions from his own lawyers. But things changed during cross-examination. The prosecution played sultry voicemails the rabbi left Elaine Sonsini, saying he truly loved her and needed her, which left the rabbi blushing.
I simply wanted the relationship to continue. And I can't categorize why I said what I said.
And if Len Genoff lied about his past, why didn't the rabbi do a better job vetting him?
Didn't you want to get the very best person you could find to investigate the murder of your wife?
Yes, I did.
Was Leonard Genoff the very best person you could find to do that investigation?
I didn't know.
How carefully did you look, sir? How many investigators did you talk to in picking out Mr. Jenoff? How many people did you go through to get him?
I didn't investigate any other.
Didn't talk to anybody else?
Nope.
But something else Fred Neulander did on the witness stand even bugged his own lawyer.
What bothered me the most when we questioned him, or when the prosecutor questioned him about coming home and seeing his wife on the floor, instead of describing his wife as Carol, he said, "I saw the body on the floor."
Hours after you found your wife, you referred to her as the body, correct?
Correct.
It just came across to me as being too cold.
Here's something else that was cold. The rabbi found his wife bloodied and beaten in their home, and he didn't touch her. He didn't put her in his arms. He didn't comfort her.
That's right. I stayed away. I saw her, and I couldn't deal with it.
If a person comes in and sees their wife bloodied on the floor, my response, I would hope, would be to run over to my wife and hold her and see how she is. But there can't be a typical response to that, which is what we argued to the jury. Nobody could possibly know that unless they were put in that position.
Okay, that's definitely true. But then came the question that had lingered from the night of his wife's murder. Why did Fred Neulander appear so aloof?
All I can tell you is that I know how I grieve. I usually have a private experience of crying and then quickly gather it together.
Then the rabbi talked himself into trouble. He first said he loved Elaine Sonsini and even wrote her a letter that said so. But the next day on the witness stand, he changed his testimony.
Yes, I can say I didn't love her.
You told the jury yesterday that you did love her, correct?
I never had any intention of continuing a relationship with her. I wanted to maintain whatever relationship we had.
You weren't lying to this jury yesterday, were you, sir?
I gave the wrong impression. I used the wrong words.
He did not come across as a good witness. He did not come across as a credible witness, in my opinion. The key really was Jenoff. I was hoping for jurors that could see through Len Jenoff because he was the cornerstone of their case.
The defense knew that Len Jenoff also didn't come across as honest, so they presented one final surprise witness, a man who knew Len Jenoff from AA meetings. Now, the second word in AA is anonymous. So this witness broke the pledge of anonymity and testified that while incarcerated, Len Jenoff was working on either a book or movie deal. But that deal wouldn't happen unless Rabbi Neulander was found guilty. After 3.5 weeks of heated testimony, the case of Rabbi Fred Neulander went to the jury. At the same time, a curious book debuted in bookstores titled Keep Your Mouth Shut and Your Arms Open. The book explored how to be a good rabbi and was written by Fred Neulander. By the way, I looked, and that book is still available online.
Counsel, we've received a note from the jury.
On the 7th day of deliberations, Judge Baxter received a handwritten note from the jury's foreman.
It reads as follows. Your Honor, after revisiting evidence and testimony, we, the jury, have concluded that a unanimous decision on all 3 counts is not possible. On that note, I am going to declare a mistrial.
I was stunned. Everybody was stunned. How could this possibly be?
Arthur Magida, who wrote extensively about this case, was sitting with Carol's family when Judge Baxter called a mistrial.
I did not want to turn around. I did not want to look in their faces. How dare they let him go out on the street? And they didn't. I know what I felt, and I know what I thought, and it had to have been just a fraction of their emotions.
Judge Baxter ordered a retrial for Rabbi Neulander. This time, the trial would head about an hour north of Cherry Hill to Freehold, New Jersey. Freehold is where Bruce Springsteen grew up and even sang about it in his 1985 song, My Hometown. The reason Judge Baxter moved the trial was to find an impartial jury.
It was difficult finding a jury because this case had been so well publicized.
Megiddo was among the dozens of journalists who packed the tiny courtroom.
There were reporters, there were cameras. It was a madhouse. It was a frenzy.
Just like the first trial, the rabbi's retrial was aired from start to finish on court TV. This allowed people from all over the country to play armchair juror and debate the guilt or innocence of Rabbi Fred Neulander. But back in Cherry Hill, most had already made up their minds.
A majority of the residents of Cherry Hill, of South Jersey, majority of the congregants in McCourt Shalom, believed that Fred Neulander had a hand, somehow, in killing Carol.
In the first trial, jurors heard from Rabbi Neulander's mistress and 4 witnesses who said the rabbi wanted his wife dead. 3 of the 12 jurors didn't believe the state proved its case beyond a reasonable doubt, which resulted in a hung jury.
I could not believe that so much evidence against the rabbi was eliminated, discarded, disgraced by the jury.
In late 2002, most of the players from the first trial returned for the retrial, including the prosecutor, James Lynch.
You're going to hear that Fred Neulander, the rabbi, was a man of God who acted in a thoroughly ungodly fashion.
A year had passed between trials, and Rabbi Fred Neulander appeared much thinner and his gray hair shorter. He also had a new lawyer named Michael Riley.
Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. There is no evidence of Mr. Neulander's involvement in this case unless you listen to the words from the mouth of Len Genoff. There is nothing. There's nothing physical. There's no business records. There's no bank records. There is nothing except the mouth of Len Genoff.
Just like in the first trial, the defense said Len Genoff could not be trusted. And frankly, from everything we've learned so far, Len was not credible or trustworthy.
Len Genoff's life is nothing but lies. He even, in an effort to support this belief that he is a CIA agent, had a picture of Ronald Reagan, ostensibly autographed, "Dear Lenny," from Ronnie.
Many said the handwriting on that photo looked more like Len Genoff's than Ronald Reagan's.
There's nothing real about this man. He's a liar.
The defense argued it was Len Genoff who came up with the plan to rob and murder Carol Neulander.
Len Genoff became aware that she would take large sums of money home from her cake company. Len Genoff went to the Neulander house that night to kill her and steal her money.
The defense also suggested the rabbi's ex-mistress, Elaine Sonsini, had framed him.
Does she have a reason to be angry at this person who betrayed her too? He was seeing other women. He was not cheating on his wife. He was cheating on his girlfriend.
Just like the first trial, jurors heard testimony from Elaine Sonsini, Pepe Levin, Len Genoff, and Paul Michael Daniels. Their testimony was nearly identical to the first trial, except for one witness, the rabbi's son, Matthew. By then, Matthew was a doctor, and the prosecutor referred to him by his title, Dr. Neulander. Back on the night of his mother's murder, Matthew was working as an EMT. In fact, he was one of the first responders to his mother's murder at their home. I bring that up because of how Matthew's testimony began. Listen closely to his testimony as he describes arriving at his house.
There were 2 large guys, and they physically grabbed me and brought me back down the driveway to where I finally saw Fred.
Did you catch that? It was so subtle that you may have missed it, but Dr. Matthew Neulander referred to his father as Fred. That testimony caused Fred Neulander to immediately whisper into his lawyer's ear and ask, "Why is he calling me Fred?" But calling his father Fred was just the beginning.
When I first saw him, he looked kind of the way he looks right now, sort of blank and unemotional. He said nothing to me. He wasn't breathing heavily, wasn't crying or showing any outward sign of grief or remorse at all. He didn't have a drop of blood on his clothing.
Matthew didn't hold back about his father's lack of emotion or perceived lack of emotion over his mother's murder.
Never at any time did he show any signs outwardly of grief or remorse, and never in all the times that I've seen him in the years since has he ever cried, ever had a pleasant memory of her, or seemed to grieve or mourn for her in any way.
What you're hearing is the one huge difference between the first and second trial. Dr. Matthew Neulander was no longer protecting his father.
I asked him, "Where's Mom? What happened? Is she okay? Is someone taking care of her?" His answers were really just one. He repeated over and over again, "Everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay."
Matthew said he and his dad had had many conversations about the night of his mother's murder.
So he was repulsed by what he saw, too repulsed to go in to see if she was okay. I found my wife or child on the floor. I would want to go try to help. And you know, if he couldn't help, fine. But at least you're there.
A couple of the jurors wiped away tears as Matthew struggled to choke back his own. Ironically, it was while talking about his dad's lack of emotion.
I would have given my right arm for 5 minutes just to sit there with her and hold her hand and tell her that I was there.
Matthew's heartbreaking testimony stunned the defense. But would it be enough to overshadow the jurors' doubts about Len Genoff? While on the witness stand, Matthew Neulander only referred to his father by his first name, Fred. It was something even the rabbi's defense lawyer did not ignore.
Did he call his father Dad? No. Did he call him father? No. He called him Fred. Right from the beginning. Fred this, Fred that. The anger of that young man and the sadness was overwhelming.
Interestingly enough, the defense did not put the rabbi back on the witness stand. Instead, they focused on Len Genoff's long history of lying and urged the jurors not to let emotion cloud their judgment.
Ladies and gentlemen, emotion is not evidence. Passion is not proof.
Prosecutor James Lynch had the final word.
Mr. Leonard Genoff is not being held up to you as a model citizen. He is a man who took money to kill someone.
The case went to the 7 men and 5 women of the jury on Friday, November 15, 2002. The following Wednesday, Judge Baxter received a note from the jury's forewoman.
I understand from your note that you have reached a verdict.
Yes, we have.
After 27 hours of deliberations, the jury's forewoman stood before Judge Baxter. When she spoke, her voice quivered, and there was something else. She had tears in her eyes. Before anyone could guess the meaning of those tears, the verdict echoed through the courtroom.
Guilty.
Nearly 8 years after the murder of Carol Neulander, her husband, Rabbi Fred Neulander, was found guilty of capital murder. In the back of the courtroom, Carol's siblings all locked hands, put their heads down, and started to cry. Meanwhile, the rabbi stood there in a daze as Judge Baxter addressed the jury.
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, having found the defendant Fred Neulander guilty of murder, you now have, as you know, the added responsibility of determining what penalty for that crime is to be imposed upon him.
A guilty verdict in a capital murder trial triggers what's known as the penalty phase. This meant these 12 jurors, one who already had tears in her eyes, had the added responsibility of deciding the rabbi's fate. And at the time, New Jersey still had the death penalty.
Under the law enacted by our legislature, the penalty may be either death or a term of years between 30 years and life imprisonment, of which 30 years must be served before the defendant is eligible for parole.
Much like the trial itself, the prosecutors and the defense both presented their arguments for what they considered just punishment. And that included testimony from the rabbi.
I am here to offer a plea for my life.
Fred Neulander was 61 years old at the time and delivered what was arguably the most important sermon of his life.
If I look at the days of the years of my life before the 1st of November of 1994, they were filled with great blessings. First and foremost, I had my wife, Carol. She was a remarkable woman. And I miss her, and I loved her, and I love her. Now, there are those who I'm sure behind their hands would snicker. I have acknowledged for the longest time my behavior that was reprehensible and my behavior that was disgraceful. And yet, you must believe I loved her and love her. Starting today, there is another sense of the days of the years of my life that will unfold. I do not know where I will be. Quite obviously, don't know now. But wherever I will be, there will be men who cannot read.
The rabbi explained that in Hebrew, the word rabbi means teacher.
I'm a good teacher. I was a good teacher. I can be a good teacher, and I want to help that young man. That will enhance the days of the years of my life by helping the days of the years of that young man's life. That's all I want, is that opportunity to teach. I beseech you, I importune you, I beg of you for that privilege. And I promise that I will do whatever a teacher should do to enrich the lives of people that come in contact with that teacher.
The rabbi smiled and nodded to the jury before slowly walking back to the defense table. He sat down, removed his glasses, and looked exhausted. 2 full days passed before the jury returned. That's when the forewoman handed a note to Judge Baxter.
After due deliberation, the jury cannot unanimously agree upon punishment.
This shifted the responsibility back to Judge Baxter, who now had to impose a sentence. At another hearing in early 2003, witnesses from both sides stated their case for punishment, including the rabbi's sister-in-law.
He is truly a monster beyond human comprehension, and he should never, ever be free again.
Carol's brother also didn't mince words.
You are the lowest form of humanity. You dishonored Carol, yourself, your children, this court, your congregation, the rabbinate, and Judaism.
Absent from the hearing were the rabbi's son Matthew and daughter Rebecca. Instead, they sent letters to the court. Rebecca wrote, "I'm not sure that he will ever fully comprehend what his egomaniacal and selfish acts did to my family and me." Matthew went a step further and called his father a sociopath and a worthless, soulless, pathetic shell of a man. Throughout both of these trials, the third Neulander child, Benjamin, steered clear of the courtroom. Until now, Benjamin had refrained from commenting and testifying about his mother's murder. But that day, all eyes were on him as he walked into the courtroom and broke his silence about his father.
Things like soccer games, swim meets, school events, at as many as he could. I remember seeing him there. And, those were the good times. I knew that when I needed somebody to be there for me, for any particular difficulty that I was having, he and I could relate on a very special level. And I knew that as busy as he was, he would always be able to find time to just guide me through whatever issues that I was having. That's what he did for many people, was to guide them. And I knew that I could always count on him to be around for that.
Benjamin Neulander was now returning the favor for his dad.
I'm a teacher. And one of the biggest reasons that I'm a teacher is because of my father. So I think that speaks for just his influence on me. I think he led me down an amazing path. And I think that there are other people that he can do that for. And just give him the chance to show that he can still do that, because I know that he can.
Ultimately, Fred Neulander's fate was in Judge Baxter's hands. And after careful consideration, she spared him the death penalty, instead issuing the maximum sentence short of death, 30 years to life. Here's his former lawyer, Jeff Zucker.
He's in a prison where almost everybody in the prison is serving tremendously long sentences or life sentences. The last time I saw him, he still professes his innocence. Says he had nothing to do with it.
Rabbi Fred Neulander was incarcerated in a maximum security prison in New Jersey. It's one of the country's oldest facilities.
I feel horribly for the family. I mean, I don't think he's had any contact with his children. I spent a lot of time with each of his children preparing for this trial, and they were all nice kids. They really were. It's a horrible tragedy for them. I think Matthew was legitimately horrified by his father. First, your mother's murdered, and then your father's convicted of the murder. It can't get much worse.
In 2003, Rabbi Neulander agreed to an interview with Barbara Walters. And once again, the rabbi declared his innocence.
If you were innocent, why would God do this to you?
I don't think God is a great puppeteer. I think what happened to me was driven by human beings.
Rabbi Neulander said law enforcement was under an enormous amount of pressure to solve the murder and used his infidelity to label him a murderer.
Rabbi, as God is your witness, did you have anything to do with your wife's murder?
No.
He said that of all the victims, he cried the most for his children. He added that he was devastated that 2 of them wrote him off.
Aren't you tormented if you're sitting here an innocent man?
You have no idea how much rage I have.
Show it.
You know, one of the things that I have been trained to do is hold on to my emotions.
The rabbi explained that there's no book that says this is how a guilty person acts and this is how an innocent person acts.
I can't express remorse for a murder that I did not commit.
Afterwards, Barbara Walters called their interview eerie because the rabbi, who claimed to be enraged, displayed no emotion throughout their interview. As for Len Genoff and Paul Michael Daniels, the 2 who actually carried out the murder of Carol Neulander, both pled guilty and were sentenced to 23 years in prison.
I've dealt in one way or another with the Neulander case since 1999.
Arthur Megiddo wrote the book, The Rabbi and the Hitman. And there was one final and bizarre twist in this case. In May 2008, Len Genoff filed a motion challenging his sentence. In that motion, he claimed ineffective counsel and stated that his lawyer slept through most of his court proceedings. He also alleged he had been promised significantly less time than 23 years.
Len Genoff was such a dubious and questionable character, and in the best of all worlds, nobody should believe anything he ever said.
And then, in 2009, Len Genoff said he had given a lot of thought to what happened and wanted to set the record straight. In a signed affidavit, Len wrote, "Fred Neulander never asked me to kill his wife, and to the best of my knowledge, he never had any idea of any attempt on his wife's life." In other words, Len Genoff recanted and said the incident at the Neulanders was a robbery gone bad and not a murder for hire. He said he made up the story that implicated the rabbi because he was promised leniency if he cooperated with the prosecutor's office.
How could Genoff be believed now? He's lied over and over again, he admits, but he claims he's telling the truth just this one time.
Well, it turns out Len Genoff wasn't done lying. 3 years after retracting his confession, Genoff flip-flopped yet again. In 2012, Len told the Philadelphia Inquirer that he regretted recanting his statement. He said, "I testified at 2 trials that Fred Neulander did hire me, in fact, to kill his wife and make it look like a robbery. And that is the truth." Len called his actions immoral. and again reverted to his initial testimony at the trials.
Leonard Janoff was not a man of his word, had never been a man of his word, and absolutely nothing coming out of Janoff's mouth could be believed.
In 2014, both Len Janoff and Paul Michael Daniels walked out of prison free men. They both had served more than 14 years before being released from prison. Throughout the years, Rabbi Fred Neulander has appealed his conviction and petitioned for a new trial. Each time, he was denied. In a 2012 interview with NBC 10 in Philadelphia, the rabbi admitted his behavior in his marriage was appalling. He called himself an embarrassment and said he should have behaved better, but maintained he did not kill his wife.
I would hope that there was some deep core of Fred Neulander that was speaking to him, nagging at him and telling him he was a shame and a shambles of a human being. We'll never know what happened.
He's right. We will never know the full story about why Carol Neulander was murdered, because in April 2024, the rabbi took those answers to his grave.
Fred Neulander, a former Cherry Hill rabbi who was convicted in the murder for hire of his wife, has died in prison at the age of 82.
Correctional officers found Fred Neulander unresponsive on Wednesday. After performing CPR and using an AED, Neulander was pronounced dead in the hospital.
No cause of death was released to the public. And according to one of the rabbi's former lawyers, up until the time of his death, the rabbi had been counseling other inmates on religion.